Good evening.
Good evening.
What's our time? Just bang on the hour. Let's begin. Oh, Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryankarvavahe, Tejasvinavadidhamastu mavit vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so we're here for Q&A. So if there's any questions, go right ahead.
I have just one question.
Yep.
Which is, so if I have if the ratio of my likes to dislikes, there's a larger proportion of dislikes in my field of action, is that still the right field of action for me? Or is it just that I'm noticing it's the nature of the mind and that's how it's always going to be?
Yeah, so this is the important question. We know, and there's a couple of the books he talks about this directly. He talks about how it's important to find a field of activity that is in line with your swadharma, with your own nature. If you don't, then you take someone who is loud and outgoing and put them in a library. It's not going to work. Take someone who loves maths and science and put them in an art field. It's not going to work. So you got to match your temperament with your environment. But as you point out, anytime you get into any field of activity, there's always going to be aspects of it that you like and aspects of it that you don't like. The mere fact that you are finding that your dislikes are being impinged upon more than it used to isn't an indication that you're in the wrong field of activity. What we always experience is a mixture of environment and temperament. We're always experiencing that subject-object relationship. So the question is, well, what has changed? So it could be that the environment hasn't changed much, but your mental attitude has. It could be that your basic attitude is the same, but your environment has changed. And so it's a matter of looking at both. So there's a difference between field of activity and daily tasks. So if you are in the field of activity of teaching, it could be that you start off and you spend 50% of your time teaching and 20% of your time in curriculum development and 30% of your time in marking students' work and admin type stuff. It could be that over time more admin stuff starts coming in, and so you've got to spend more time doing stuff, and a greater proportion is now taken up with admin, which you don't like. So that doesn't mean that you're in the wrong field of activity. You're still in the correct field of activity, but it could simply be that you've taken on things that really do impinge upon your dislikes now. The question there is, what do you do about that? And again, there's two ways to manage it. One is to alter your environment and look at what necessarily is your activity. It could be, let's say, this person who's a teacher. It could be that they are running their own independent teaching business, and there's no one else to do the job. It simply has to be done by that person. Then you simply have to recognize, well, this comes as part of it. If the work can be sort of outsourced, then it's another option for you. But if it can't be outsourced, then it doesn't mean that you're in the wrong field of activity, but it does mean that you need to look at the work that you're doing through a different lens. So it's a mixture of the two, because you can't expect yourself to start to like what you don't like. It's unreasonable. The mind will start liking it. And so finding a way to mitigate the amount of negative work, let's call it that, it's not negative work, but the dislike stuff, is just the first practical approach. When you've got that down to a bare minimum, then it will be a matter of reframing the work that you're doing. So the idea of reframing is essentially to, and there's a quote I've heard attributed to Nietzsche, which is along the lines of, any what is acceptable if you have a why. So it's that idea of purpose. It's that idea of your reason for doing it. So if you can connect all of the activities with the higher reason for doing that work itself, and the higher, the better. When we say higher, we mean that which is less removed from the ego. The more you can do that, then the less the ego is going to relate to the stuff that you don't like. So part of it will come back to asking the question, why am I doing this at all? So ask the teacher, why are you teaching? What's your motivation? What's your purpose? And they'll come up with an answer. Anytime then you find yourself engaged in work that you don't like, and there is that sense of frustration, then why am I doing this? So you need to be able to connect the activity with the higher purpose. And if you can't, then you need to start looking at whether or not that activity is appropriate. Give you a short example. Let's say that you are holding an event, and you're bringing other teachers from different parts of the country in to discuss pedagogy. And as part of it, of course, there's food. And you're stressing about whether or not the serviettes match the tablecloth. You hate that kind of thing. It's not your, definitely not in your nature to worry about that kind of thing. It starts to become annoying. It starts to become frustrating. What am I doing? I'm checking to see that the serviettes match the tablecloth. Why am I doing it? Because I'm trying to develop a community of educators. What? How is having matching serviettes and tablecloths developing a community of educators? So there's an example of where the work that I'm doing doesn't match my purpose. If it's blue serviettes and red tablecloth, it's not going to affect the greater purpose. I can dispense with that activity. It's not necessary. So this is the kind of check that you need to go through to connect your activity with the higher purpose. This is a way of reframing it. Having said that, so that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is to say that, well, if this is what the job entails, or the activity, it doesn't have to be a job. And we talk about entering into a field of activity with your swadharma. There's a tendency to think of it in terms of job and career, but it doesn't have to be. It can be hobby, it can be other things. But if the activity does begin to predominantly be things you don't like, then you do need to review. And if it looks like this activity is basically all this stuff which impinges on my dislikes, well, needless suffering is not the way to live. It could well be that you need to dispense with that particular activity and find another way to express your swadharma. It doesn't mean that the field has been wrongly chosen, but it could mean that the activity that you have created within that field is the wrong one. You might be, your Swadhyama, you might be passionate about the environment. And so you join an organization which the only thing it does is to protect and preserve the environment, and you get put into the HR department. And you don't like people. Got no time for them. I like plants and I like animals, but human beings, no time for them. You're in the right field of activity. You're in the right place in the sense that you're working to protect and preserve the environment, but you're in the wrong department. You should be in the department that does something else, So that's the distinction. It's the right field of activity, but the wrong department. So you may need to look at shifting. And the shift can be wholesale, like I say, from department to department, or it can be, as I touched on earlier with that sort of practical approach, is looking at the workload that I have allowed to come onto my plate. For most of us, we allow the workload to grow into something else, and we actually do have more control over it than we would think. The problem is that we don't have conscious boundary setting, and so we let all sorts of new things get added to what was once a plate this size now becomes a plate this size, and everything that's been added is stuff I don't like to eat. So it's a matter of being aware that may have happened, and then look for a way to go back to a smaller size plate. But the short answer to the question is that it doesn't indicate that you're in the wrong field of activity just because you've increased the number of activities you don't like. But perhaps it does mean that you haven't been as conscious as you could have been about what activities you do and don't take on.
That makes sense. So when assessing one's nature and line of work to determine the line of work, it's not just the field I need to assess. What else would I need to assess, broadly speaking?
And what you need to know most intimately is yourself, your nature. So one of the ways I've heard it described is, what is it that gives you energy? What do you have a sort of natural enthusiasm for that seems to be tireless? And what can you do for a long period of time without getting bored, without getting fatigued, without needing an encouragement from outside to do it? I need to get the reminder emails to finish the taxes off, otherwise I won't get it done. Oh, I love taxes. I love spreadsheets. I love numbers. I've got my taxes done. Every couple of weeks I do something else because I love doing it. So this is the question to ask yourself, and it's a matter of introspection of what gives me energy. Where do I find a natural enthusiasm? What desires do I possess? What do I want? And so part of this is imagining an ideal life. And this is where we come up with that. We've spoken it before about that idea of what if I won the lottery? If money was no object, I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to worry about food and shelter and healthcare for the rest of my life, nor my parents, nor my kids, nor my family. What would I do with my time? that starts to give you an idea. There are some online resources as well where you can do things like strengths finders and the ikigai analysis, and that can give you some starting points. Wouldn't necessarily say they give you answers, but they give you starting points for reflection. So it's thinking about it in terms of, you know, what gifts have I been given to share with my environment? What am I naturally good at that I can now use in my field of activity? That's what you need to know most intimately. And then it's a matter of, if you like, keeping your eyes open to environments or to opportunities where it can be expressed. So it'll be different for everybody. Some people are more inclined to be entrepreneurial in that regard. Some people will be more inclined to be to fit into a team role within an existing organization. But the basic thing is the same, which is to have a sense of what your ideal environment is. And then begin to look for and create opportunities to express that. So as much as you need to know what your nature is, you also need to know what you are, what drains your energy. Let's put it that way. What makes you feel uninspired, unenthusiastic. And so those are the two bookends. So these are the boundaries that you're looking to fit the work within.
How do you balance that with not being driven by likes and dislikes?
Well, you are being driven by likes and dislikes, but it's being done consciously. So it's a little bit of a play on words. Being driven by likes and dislikes means that the likes and dislikes make the decision. What this is talking about is knowing what your likes and dislikes are, and then you choosing with them as information. So you are choosing according to what you like, but this is the important point. You are choosing according to what your likes and dislikes are. It's a big difference from your likes and dislikes choosing for you. There's that phrase in the Gita, they are in me, but I am not in them. He's talking about the gunas. That's a great way to think about it. You can say either my likes and dislikes are within me, or I am within my likes and dislikes. When you say my likes and dislikes are within me, what you're saying is this is my whole self. This large thing that I call myself, my likes and dislikes are a part of it. And now you use them as information for making good decisions. I like talking to people. I don't like working in a room by myself. Okay, so here's an opportunity. How much admin work am I going to have versus how much face-to-face time? Okay, I don't make it 100, 0. I'm a human being. I can accommodate things I don't like. But if that's my nature, then I should be doing lots of HR stuff and a little bit of admin. Someone might be the opposite. They should be doing a lot of admin stuff because they love working on their own without having to consult a team or a micromanager. They just get their work done in their own space, and occasionally they go and talk to people. So you're not being driven, well, again, it's a matter of language. Your likes and dislikes are helping you to decide what is best for you, but it's your decision, not the likes and dislikes. It's the difference between being involved in your likes and dislikes and being objective to them.
Can you give an example that demonstrates like the difference?
So let's stay with our example of someone who finds the field of activity correct in terms of an organization that protects and preserves the environment. That person, let's say the person's being driven, they are involved in their likes and dislikes. So they apply for a job in HR because they like talking to people, they like asking them questions and finding out about what's your nature, what kind of things do you like, and finding the best place to put them. And they like talking to managers about that person. They like rearranging people like, pieces on a chessboard, and they really like that kind of stuff. And they get that job. But once you've had an interview with someone, what do you have to do? You've got to write a report. And that report has to be submitted in a particular format, because otherwise it gets put into the computer system in a particular way. And you have to write summary reports once a week to your manager. And what are you doing during that time? You're sitting in a room on your own on your computer. If I'm driven by my likes and dislikes, then I'm good at interviewing and I'm good at making notes. But when it comes to doing the admin stuff that comes with it, I procrastinate on it. I avoid doing it. I do it late. I don't do a very good job of it. But more importantly, I feel drained by it. I feel burdened by it. So what's the problem here? The problem here is that I went into it blinkered. I went into it with unrealistic expectations. When I do the HR job, I'm going to spend all my time talking to people. So what's made the choice? My like to talk to people, my liking for that activity. And I read the job description about, some of the admin side of it, but that's not really what I noticed. I only noticed the part that I liked and didn't really pay attention to the part that I didn't like. And now I'm stuck doing it and I feel burdened by my job. So I developed an unrealistic expectation of the work. Contrast that with someone who is more objective in their approach. I know what I like and I know what I'm naturally good at. I can get people talking about themselves and revealing information and using that to connect people and connect teams. I'm good at that. I know what I don't like. I don't like report writing and so on and so forth. So what that means is that when I look at a job, I'm going to look at, well, what are the things I'm going to do in this particular role? Oh, I see I've got to do this kind of admin. So I notice it and I'm aware of that aspect, that it's going to impinge upon my dislikes. So I might do a little more investigation. So what sort of proportion would you say? I'm asking the interviewer. What sort of proportion? Oh, it's about 70-30. Okay, fine. I've got realistic expectations of the work because it's not my likes and dislikes that are driving me to see the opportunity in a particular way. I know what I'm getting into. So that's coming from having a recognition that there's this collection of likes and dislikes within me. It doesn't define me, it doesn't tell me who and what I am. It's just a part of me. That objectivity that allows you to relate to the environment more objectively, so you don't start to develop these unrealistic expectations. The other thing that happens is that if the workload begins to change, if I'm objective, then I don't react to that emotionally. Okay, my emotions will react. Oh, I don't like this. But my reaction to it is to say, well, hang on, I sort of took this job under the assumption that it was going to be 70-30. And now I see that it's going to become 50-50. We need to renegotiate. or we need to look at the job description or something like that. So it's the idea of that being objective to your own likes and dislikes changes the way that you relate to the environment that you find yourself in.
So in the second case, you're not affected by the likes and dislikes.
Yeah, you're definitely less affected, because what affects you is when your expectations are not met. I always use that same example. You're traveling on the freeway and there's a big orange sign, road work ahead, expect delays. That sign is there so that you can manage your expectations. And if the expectations are properly managed, then when you come across the thing you don't like, you're less affected. The problem we have is that smashing of environment into temperament. The managing of expectations adds a buffer. They come together rather than crash together. And so if you're objective to your own likes and dislikes, you say, okay, well, I don't like doing admin, and I do like doing the interviewing. That level of objectivity, you're meeting your environment with that. And so even the fact that when you come across something you don't like, you're, yep, well, I knew this was part of the job. But if I go, and the other thing is I can go into the job and start it with that kind of objectivity, but then if I lose the objectivity, then when the environment begins to change and they start loading me up with more admin, I react to it in a way that I am affected. Because again, I've lost the objectivity. So you can think of it this way, that it's by being objective to your own temperament and your own likes and dislikes that you can be objective to the environment as well.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah. You're never experiencing your environment. It seems that way to us. Like, here I am and this is my environment. I'm looking at it. You go to a stage show and the performer pulls out a huge boa constrictor and he's singing and playing with a boa constrictor. One person sees something hilarious. There's an absurdity about it. Another person sees something horrifying. It's like a horror show. Another person sees something else. No one is experiencing the snake. Everybody is experiencing their snake reacting with their temperament. That's why to this person it's something funny, to this person it's something horrifying. So we're always experiencing that. The problem is that it doesn't seem that way to us because we're so embedded in our own nature that we don't see it happening. And so it seems to us that I'm only experiencing the environment. But if we're objective to our likes and dislikes, essentially what's happening then is that we're standing back and watching the environment react with my like, which gives me a feeling of yay, watching the environment react with my dislike, which gives me a feeling of I'm seeing it happen. So by being objective to my own likes and dislikes, I can see them interacting with this changing environment. And so you're objective to the whole experience. So that's sort of what I'm saying. You're objective to your environment. because your environment is temperament plus stimulus. That is what it appears to you as. So the more you can be objective to your own mind, the more you are objective to the receipt reaction mechanism, and the more you can then choose your response. So that objectivity to your own temperament is in large part self-assessment. You know, what am I like? What are the things that I find interesting and attractive? What are the things I don't like? And developing an acceptance of that. It doesn't mean that you never change it, but it means saying this is the way that it is. You assess your dog. Okay, tiny little dog, and so barks at everything. That's its nature. What is my temperament like? I bark at this and I, whatever. So the objectivity comes from that self-assessment, and the acceptance comes from that self-assessment. This is what I am like. The other aspect of objectivity comes from having a service-oriented purpose for it. So that's where I use that word gifts. And it's a much harder attitude to actually hold than you might think. To say these are my gifts, these are things that I have to offer the world. It's kind of tough. It feels can feel egocentric. Look how great I am. Well, that itself is egocentric, to feel that it's difficult. The simple fact of the matter is that there's some things that you're good at naturally that other people are not. You can't take credit for it. I was just born this way. I can do numbers. Don't ask me why. It's just a gift that was given to me when I was born. So actually, by calling it a gift, it's less egocentric, because it sort of feels like I'm not taking responsibility for it. But having this idea that I have something that I can use this to contribute to my environment in a way that's very easy for me. So having a higher purpose in that regard. And the other aspect of an ideal that we always talk about is to have a growth-oriented ideal. So knowing what it will look like when I am more mature means knowing what I'm like right now. So having a clear-eyed view of strengths and weaknesses. So I'll just sort of recap that idea of developing objectivity to your own mind. In large part, it comes from just assessing what is and recognizing that these are the vasanas. And then the second aspect is to have an ideal in which you are service-oriented in your approach and growth-oriented. There was 3. I feel like I'm missing one. Maybe it was 3.
So is the goal of spiritual development to remove the likes and dislikes, or that?
You can't remove likes and dislikes.
Okay.
Having said that, you can grow out of some likes and dislikes. When you are less mature, you like winning arguments because it proves how smart you are. as you mature, you might say, I don't really like winning arguments anymore. I don't like losing them, but I just don't like winning arguments as much as I used to. It just doesn't, because it doesn't change the other person's mind. I'd much rather find areas of collaboration and agreement than I am about winning. So to that extent, you can say that you grow out of certain likes and dislikes. But from the perspective of your Swadharma, you won't change those. If you like dealing with people, that's your nature. That's what makes you you. If you like spreadsheets and numbers, that makes you you. Get rid of those, then who are you? Well, you're either a nobody or there'll be a new set of fresh likes and dislikes that you got to deal with. So spiritual growth is not about removing likes and dislikes. It's about changing the master-slave relationship of having your likes and dislikes determine the way that you view the world. I always give that similar example. You see a young child, you try and feed her some broccoli mush, and she hates broccoli mush, and so what does she do? Pushes it away. I don't like it. That's how we still, as adults, relate to things we don't like. We just push them away, but we do it in a more socially mature way. We avoid it in a different way, even though it's something that is good for us. So the maturity is not to get rid of your likes and dislikes, but rather for you to decide how you will use them, to disconnect from them. I don't like broccoli mush, but I'm going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it every day for 3 meals, but there's a bare minimum that I do need to. So I'll have it, once every couple of days. I'll choke it down before the stuff I like eating. So that's the maturity, is for you to be in the driver's seat rather than your likes and dislikes. Again, they're a part of me. I'm managing them rather than them managing me.
Okay, this clarifies a lot of misunderstandings.
Okay, good.
Back to drawing board and think.
Good. Yeah, and it's also a matter of language, because from another perspective, you might say spiritual growth is eradicating likes and dislikes. You could use that language, but it doesn't mean taking out all the things that you like. And then, so what do you like about the world? Nothing. I'm very spiritually mature. What do you like to do? Oh, I don't like to do anything. I'm this close to realization. I don't like anything. Don't like you. Don't like people. No likes. Don't dislike anything either. Just, and you look at people who are recognized as being spiritually mature, and there are things that they like. The Swami Parthasarathy, he'll watch cricket when cricket's on because he likes it. But if he has to do something else, he's not going to let that get in the way of. He's not going to let cricket get in the way of doing his obligations, because the master-slave relationship is appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes the language is a bit confusing.
Yeah, and it can lead to sort of an unfortunate suppression if we wrongly understand that these are stuff that I like, but I shouldn't really be liking it so much. No, like the world as much as you want. The more you like it, the better, But be aware also that there'll be elements that you don't like, and accept that. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, you can think of spiritual growth. The objective of spiritual growth is to develop objectivity to nature. And along the way, you'll need to change some of your nature, things that keep you bound. But that's not the goal. You might eradicate bits of your nature just to help to keep you more and more, or to grow your objectivity. But the removal of desire, as we talked about it, you can think of it as getting rid of the desires that keep your consciousness bound, and then freeing yourself from identifying with desires. Yeah, a good example of this is in the Gita. Krishna is a self-realized soul, and he very clearly says, you are self-realized when you have cast off all desires of the mind. So a self-realized soul is someone who has no desires. And yet at the same time, he says, out of compassion, Krishna spoke these words. What does that mean? You can legitimately call compassion as the desire for the other person's well-being. He talks about loka sangraham, wishing the welfare of the world. So what is it? Do you have no desire? Or do you have desire for Arjuna's well-being and his own spiritual growth? I have desire for it, but it's not my desire. I don't identify with it. The desire is in me, but I'm not the desire. I am the consciousness in which the desire functions, but I am not the desire. So from that perspective, I have no desire because I am the consciousness. And yet that body, mind, intellect system is expressing his love and his affection for Arjuna and his compassion, his desire for him to be liberated from his own suffering. So what does it mean to be free of desire? It means to no longer identify with the mind.
But it doesn't mean the mind doesn't exist.
Say that again?
It doesn't mean the mind doesn't exist.
Correct. It doesn't exist for you because you're in consciousness. You are the consciousness, in the sense that it doesn't define who and what you are. But that same cycle of action continues: vasana, thought, desire, action. So we use the term prarabdha vasanas, which gives rise to prarabdha thoughts, prarabdha desires, and prarabdha actions. What does that mean? Actions that are propelled through the same cycle, but it's just the residual material expressing outwards. I have identified not with the material bodies, which go through this process of vasana, thought, desire, action. I'm identifying instead with the medium in which it takes place, the consciousness. You've got two chemicals, A and B, reacting together to give rise to C. It's happening in the medium of, say, water. So the water's not being reacted with. The water's not being changed. It's staying as water. It's chemicals A and B that are changing into creating C. The water's just the medium in which it's taking place, unaffected. In a similar way, the world reacts with the mind does its thing, and the body then responds outwards. I'm not the world, I'm not the body, and I'm not the mind. I'm the medium in which it's taking place, consciousness. So I have no desire. But who's saying that? Consciousness doesn't have a mouth. It's only a body, mind, intellect system that has a mouth. So it has to come from somewhere. That statement has to come from somewhere, and it comes from what we perceive to be an individual. But we're projecting onto that self-realized soul an individuality that just doesn't exist. And yet it still has to function through language, because that's what the intellect is, if you like. That's how it communicates.
Okay, I think I have to think more about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's join the club.
Yeah, it's totally different than the initial surface understanding I had.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes time. You know, there's a continuous sort of updating of our understandings as we go along, you know. So it's, you know, there's that great quote that I've mentioned a few times that the Swami gave in one of the group discussions. Correct thinking is to know your thinking is not correct. So whatever I've understood a particular concept to mean, okay, it's productive and useful in this way, but there's a better way to think about it. There's still a limitation on it, and the ego can still appropriate it for its own devices, for its own demands. So there's an update to it that is coming. So yeah, always sort of refreshing.
Thank you, Glenn.
No problem. That's the question.
Yeah. Were there any other questions that came in?
Yep, that was it. So
Okay.
if there's nothing else.
Thank you. Hurry on.
All right, hurry on.